The room was deathly still, except for the faint sound of breath. She stood in the doorway, clutching a worn envelope in her trembling hands. The letters inside seemed to weigh more than the paper they were printed on. "I've seen the list." Her voice cracked, barely audible. "I know what they're offering." The words were out now, and there was no taking them back. Every secret she had tried to bury surged to the surface, and with it, an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Her eyes flickered to the shadows in the corner, where a figure sat, watching her intently. "And the price?" he asked, his voice as cold as steel. The answer sat heavy in her chest, but she didn't speak. The truth had already been revealed in the broken silence. The auction was real, and so was the darkness. The silence that followed her revelation hung like a heavy fog. Her chest tightened with the weight of what she had just admitted. She knew the price now, but she couldn't say it aloud. The auction was real, and the unimaginable could now become a sickening reality. She had crossed a line, and everything that came after would be a consequence. "You should never have come here." The figure in the corner spoke again, his voice now deeper, more commanding. "But you did. And now, you'll see what happens next." She felt the icy chill creep up her spine. There was no going back, not anymore. She wasn't just a witness. She was a participant. Her breath hitched as she finally turned her gaze toward the figure, unable to hold back her fear any longer. "What happens now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was cold, calculating. "Now, you see what you're part of. What you've chosen to be a part of." He rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, slow as though savoring the moment. Her heart raced in her chest, every instinct screaming at her to run, but her body refused to obey. She knew she had already made her choice, even if she hadn't spoken it aloud. There was no escape. Not anymore. The figure stepped forward, his presence consuming the space between them. The woman took a step back, but he was too close now. Too real. "I can't. I didn't mean for this to happen," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. The figure leaned in, his cold breath on her skin, his lips brushing just below her ear as he spoke. "It's too late for regret." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle like stones into the silence. "You already made your choice when you stepped into this room." She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the truth, but it was already embedded in her mind. The auction was no longer an abstract concept. It was her reality. "You're not leaving here until it's done," the figure said, his tone final, unyielding. The woman's world tilted. She felt the walls close in on her, the very air pressing against her chest. Her mind raced as her pulse quickened. She hadn't signed up for this. She never asked for this to be her life. But the truth was undeniable now. She wasn't just an observer. She was part of something monstrous. The light above flickered again, casting a brief, unsettling shadow on her face. She looked around the room, feeling trapped in the suffocating silence. "What now?" she whispered. The figure's eyes glinted with something dark, something final. "Now we begin," he said, his voice cold. The room felt colder now, an oppressive silence hanging in the air. The woman stood motionless, trying to steady her breath, but it came in shallow gasps. She couldn't escape the weight of what she had learned, what she was now a part of. "You knew this was coming," the figure in the corner said, his voice cutting through the stillness. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, as if testing her reaction. "You didn't think you could walk away once you saw the list, did you?" Her mind raced. She wanted to deny it, to shout that this wasn't her doing, but the truth clung to her like a second skin. "I never wanted this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He chuckled darkly, taking another step closer. "Wanting or not, you're already in too deep." She swallowed hard, trying to find the courage to speak, to deny the truth he was imposing on her, but the words stuck in her throat. The man in front of her continued, his voice smooth and calculated. "The auction's already started. Your name's on the list. There's no turning back now." Her hands began to shake, the reality of it all crashing down on her. She felt herself spiraling into panic. "I didn't sign up for this," she gasped, her voice rising in panic. "I didn't know." The figure's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a cold smile. "Oh, you knew more than you think. It was never a matter of choice. You've already stepped over the line." She wanted to run to escape, but her body refused to obey, frozen in place by fear and regret. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, but the reality was that she was cornered. The auction was real, and now she was part of something that felt impossible to undo. "What do you want from me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice shaky but determined. He chuckled softly, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "What I want isn't as important as what you can offer. You've already given us everything we need." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The real question is, what are you willing to sacrifice?" Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the weight of his words. There was nothing left for her to do but wait for the consequences. Every second felt like it stretched into eternity. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. The man in front of her wasn't just a figure of authority. He was a part of the system she had unknowingly entered. And now, she was helpless to do anything about it. "You'll understand soon enough," he said with a smirk, his voice low and taunting. "Everyone does eventually." He stepped back slightly, giving her space but still remaining a constant threat in her peripheral vision. "What happens to me?" she asked, the words slipping out in a desperate whisper. His smile widened, his eyes glinting with something darker than just control. "You'll find out, when the time comes." The room felt colder still, and the air seemed to grow thinner, leaving her gasping for breath. She didn't know how much time had passed. The silence stretched on as her mind tried to process everything: the auction, the choices she'd made without realizing it, and the horrifying realization that she was now an unwilling participant. "You're not the first to be caught like this," the figure said, his voice growing softer, almost comforting in its mockery. "And you won't be the last, but you will be the most interesting." He moved closer again, his voice becoming a whisper. "You're not just here for us, you're here for them, and you'll do exactly what they want." Her stomach turned. "I won't," she said, trying to find some semblance of strength, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "We'll see," he replied. The coldness of the room seemed to deepen as he spoke. The words were like a slap, shattering everything she had believed. "She was never missing," he said, his voice so cold it sent a chill through her bones. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The woman staggered back, her heart racing in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled. The figure in front of her leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "The truth is far worse than you think. You've been living a lie." Her thoughts spiraled, each revelation unraveling the fragile reality she had constructed. You're lying," she whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt the walls of her world begin to crumble. "I didn't lose her," he continued, his words sinking deeper into her mind. "I gave her away." The world felt like it was tilting beneath her feet. The room, once filled with oppressive tension, now seemed to close in around her, suffocating her. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the puzzle, but the pieces didn't fit. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It can't be. She was gone." The figure's expression hardened, the amusement fading from his face. "She wasn't gone. She was taken. Handed over for a price." Her breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words settling like stones in her chest. "You sold her?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I didn't sell her," he corrected coldly. "I gave her what she deserved. The auction was only part of it." She felt as though the ground had been pulled from beneath her. Her world, which had once seemed clear and tangible, was now a fractured mess of lies. "You're lying," she screamed, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "You're trying to break me." The figure remained unmoved, his face impassive. "No," he replied, his voice calm and unyielding. "I'm trying to show you the truth. Your reality was never real. You've been living in a carefully crafted lie." She stumbled backward, her mind reeling, unable to make sense of the new reality he was presenting. Her vision blurred, and she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of everything she thought she knew, shattering before her eyes. The truth was suffocating. She had no words left, no strength to fight back. The figure crouched down to her level, his eyes locking onto hers. "You wanted to believe in the lie because it was easier," he said softly. "But you knew deep down something was off, and now you're facing the consequences." She couldn't look away from him, her gaze locked in a silent struggle. "No, I don't believe you," she murmured. But the certainty in her voice faltered. The figure smiled faintly, almost pityingly. "You will," he said, his voice carrying a chilling finality. "In time you will see that everything I've told you is the truth, and when that moment comes you'll wish you had never known." Her world was falling apart, piece by piece. The figure stood up and turned away, leaving her on the floor, broken and trembling. "You're part of this now," he said without looking back. "You can't undo what's been done, and neither can I." She tried to summon the strength to rise, to fight back, but her body refused to move. She was trapped, suffocating in the web of lies and betrayal that had entangled her. "I didn't want this," she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. The figure paused but didn't turn around. "It doesn't matter what you want anymore," he said, his voice low and cold. "This is bigger than you, and now there's no way out." The finality in his tone was a nail in the coffin of her hope. The room felt like a prison now. Each corner closed in around her, the walls pressing in, suffocating her. She couldn't breathe. The realization of what she was trapped in hit harder than any physical blow. The figure stood across from her, his presence towering and unyielding. "You think you can run from this?" he asked, his voice dark and taunting. Her eyes were wide, filled with the remnants of the terror she felt, and yet something inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance. "I'll make you regret this," she said, the words filled with a strength she didn't feel. He laughed, the sound cold and sharp, like a knife slicing through the last remnants of her hope. "No, you won't," he said calmly. "You don't have the choice anymore. You're already in too deep." The air seemed to crackle with tension. Every word she spoke now felt like an act of defiance against a force much greater than her. "I won't do it," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The figure's eyes narrowed as he took a step closer, his face now inches from hers. "You don't have a choice," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. She recoiled, but the weight of his words pressed down on her. "It's not about choice anymore," he continued, his voice low and mocking. "It's about what happens when you finally realize you're nothing more than a pawn in this game." Her hands balled into fists, a surge of anger rising within her. "I'm not your pawn," she spat, though her voice betrayed the fear that still lingered. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as she stared into the cold, calculating eyes of the figure. "You'll break," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. Her lips trembled, but her resolve began to harden. "I'll never break," she whispered fiercely, the last of her fear dissolving into raw determination. The figure stepped back, his eyes glinting with something darker than just control. "You will," he repeated, "because that's what this is about, not strength, not courage. It's about breaking you, piece by piece, until you're nothing but a shadow of who you once were." Her hands clenched at her sides. "You won't win," she said, her voice steady now. The room around them seemed to pulse with the tension of their standoff. The moment of confrontation had arrived. The figure took another step toward her, but this time, she didn't back away. She stood her ground, her gaze never leaving his. "You don't understand," he said, his voice almost gentle, as if trying to convince her. "This was never about you, but it will be now." She felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders, crushing, suffocating. "You're wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is about me." Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. "And I will fight until I can't fight anymore." The figure didn't flinch. "You already lost," he replied, his tone final. The words stung, but they didn't break her. The fight was far from over, even if it meant losing everything. Her body ached from the weight of her decisions, the consequences of what she had come to understand settling in like a heavy cloak. "You don't know what you've started," the figure said, his voice now carrying an edge of frustration. "This isn't a game anymore. You're part of something much bigger than you." Her heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she struggled to find her footing. "I'm not a part of anything," she snapped back, her voice raw. "I'm just trying to survive." The figure stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with cold intent. "Then you'll learn what survival really means," he said, his voice cold as ice. "But be warned, it comes with a price, and you won't get to choose how it's paid." The silence in the room was suffocating, filled only with the sound of her own heartbeat. She had faced the darkness, confronted the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. But now, with everything laid bare, there was no comfort, no relief. The weight of what had been done settled over her like an anchor dragging her down. The figure's words still echoed in her mind. There's no going back. She had hoped for some kind of redemption, some form of closure, but there was none to be found. All that remained was the quiet understanding that she had been part of something irreversible. The fight had taken its toll, but now all that was left was the bitter taste of a victory that had cost too much. The price of truth had been her innocence, and it was too late to undo it. She had expected justice, but what she found was only emptiness. The figure stood in the background, silent now, watching her with a strange sense of finality. She had believed that once the truth was revealed, the weight would lift, but instead it clung to her like a shroud. "You thought you would feel better," he said softly, almost mockingly. "But you're not done yet." Her chest tightened as she looked up at him, fury boiling under her skin. "You're wrong," she said, her voice raw. "I don't need your redemption." His smile was thin, almost cruel. "That's where you're wrong. You don't get to decide how this ends. It was never about what you wanted." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath, knowing that in the end she had never had control. The days following the confrontation were a blur. She had become a shadow of herself, haunted by what she had learned. The auction, the truth, the lies. It was all too much to process. Her thoughts were a constant spiral, her mind never fully at rest. There was no peace to be found, only the echoes of the past, lingering like a ghost. She had tried to leave it all behind, but the past had a way of clawing its way back. "I can't move on," she whispered one night, her voice thick with exhaustion. The figure's words echoed again in her head. "You will never escape it." It was true. There was no moving on. Not from something like this. She would be trapped in the memory of it forever, with no hope of release. There were moments when the truth felt like a distant memory, buried deep beneath the weight of her guilt. But even then, she couldn't escape the clarity of it, the understanding that she was complicit in something monstrous. It didn't matter that she hadn't wanted it, that she had fought against it. In the end, she was part of the system, a mere cog in a machine she could not dismantle. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room, as if the walls themselves could absolve her. But she knew better. There was no redemption for her, no forgiveness to be found. She had crossed a line, and that line could never be uncrossed. The harsh truth of her involvement in the auction would stay with her forever, a constant reminder of the price of silence. She didn't know what to do with herself anymore. She had hoped at one point that the truth would be her salvation, that it would set her free. But now, she realized that the truth had become her prison. She was trapped within it, a prisoner of her own knowledge. She had wanted peace, but all she had was the gnawing, unrelenting awareness of what she had been a part of. "It's over," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. It would never be over. The auction had already taken its toll, and there was no turning back. She had been marked, and nothing would ever be the same again. Days blurred together in a haze of numbness. The weight of her decisions pressed heavily on her, a constant reminder that the truth had shattered everything she had once known. She moved through the motions of life, her body functioning on autopilot, while her mind replayed every moment of the past. Each memory was a wound that refused to heal, each step forward a painful reminder of how far she had fallen. "Why did I believe it was just a mistake?" she asked herself one morning, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The staring back at her was unfamiliar, a stranger's face marked by loss and regret. She had traded peace for knowledge, and now all that was left was an unyielding ache in her chest, a constant companion she couldn't escape. There were moments when she thought she could escape, when the thought of starting over seemed possible. But then the truth would creep back into her mind, reminding her that there was no running from it. The auction had left its mark, not just on her life but on her soul. The world outside felt distant, like it was happening to someone else, not her. "I didn't know what it would cost," she whispered one evening, sitting by the window. "I didn't know it would cost everything." She felt the walls closing in again, the familiar sense of suffocation returning. Every time she tried to breathe, she was reminded of how deep she had fallen into a world she never truly understood. A world she would never be able to escape from. Time passed, but the feeling of being stuck never left her. She had tried to move on, to heal, but the weight of her choices and the knowledge of the auction's horrors hung over her like a cloud. The guilt was constant, gnawing at her insides. She tried to distract herself, work, errands, anything to fill the void, but nothing worked. The emptiness lingered. She thought of the people she had left behind, those who would never understand, never know the truth. She couldn't even bring herself to tell them. She had become a stranger to herself, someone defined by a past she couldn't undo. And as much as she tried to push the past away, it kept returning like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. She tried to convince herself that it would get easier, that the weight of the past would eventually lessen. But with each passing day, it became clear that she was wrong. The truth was a part of her now, and there was no shaking it off. Her life had become a series of hollow motions, each day blending into the next, without meaning or purpose. "I thought I could be free," she whispered to herself in the dark, "but there's no freedom when you know too much." The past had a way of staying with you, creeping into your every thought, every moment. It haunted her, a constant reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. She would never be able to forget. And in the end, that was the most unbearable part of it all. She could feel the echoes of the past in everything she did, every conversation, every interaction, every glance. The truth had changed her in ways she couldn't explain. She had been a part of something dark, something so twisted that it could never be undone. The knowledge she carried now was a burden, one she couldn't share with anyone. It made her feel disconnected from everything and everyone around her. She had tried to find meaning in the chaos, but it always felt just out of reach. "This is my life now," she murmured softly. "This is who I am." She didn't know what she was supposed to do next, but one thing was certain. The past had defined her, and there was no going back. No starting over. No redemption. It had all led to this moment. There was no turning back now. The finality of it all hung in the air, suffocating her. Everything she had gone through, the pain, the loss, the betrayal, had brought her here to this bitter end. "I didn't want this," she whispered to herself, as if that simple statement could undo the reality she faced. But deep down, she knew it was too late for regret. The past could not be rewritten, and the future was uncertain. She had lived through the destruction, and now there was only one thing left: the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. With a deep breath she steadied herself, but the weight of it all settled deeper in her chest. The truth was out, but so was the cost. She would carry this with her forever. She had thought at one point that there would be a moment of peace after everything had unraveled. That after the truth was known, she could move forward. But peace was never offered, only the aftermath remained. She stared at the empty space around her, feeling the heavy silence press down on her. "What did I gain?" she whispered aloud, as though asking the universe itself. There was no answer. The lies had been uncovered, but in doing so, she had lost a part of herself that she could never recover. She thought of the life she might have had, a life untouched by the darkness she had uncovered. But that life was now a distant memory, unreachable, forever out of her grasp. All she had now was the empty space and the hollow feeling of survival. She walked through the streets, the city around her a blur of movement and noise. People passed by without noticing her, as if she were invisible, as if the world had moved on without her. Her heart felt heavy, the weight of everything she had lost and gained pressing down on her. "I survived," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. What was survival when it meant losing everything? She had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? What remained for her now? The people she once knew were gone, their lives seemingly unaffected by the chaos that had consumed hers. "I'll never be the same," she thought, but that truth no longer scared her. It was just another part of the world she now inhabited, a world where everything was irrevocably changed. The truth had always been there, buried beneath layers of lies, but now it was all she had left. There would be no redemption, no forgiveness. "I know what I've done," she murmured to herself, the weight of her words heavy. "I can never undo it." But even as she said it, she knew that it didn't matter. The past was a permanent part of her, and the truth, no matter how painful, was all that remained. There was no going back to who she was before. The person she was now could never exist in the same world she once inhabited. She had been marked by the truth, branded with it in a way she couldn't escape. And as much as she wished for peace, she understood now that the only way forward was to live with the cost of the knowledge she carried. The finality of it all settled in, and there was no comfort in knowing that the truth had come to light. She had uncovered the auction, the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight, but at what cost? The damage was done. The loss was irreversible. "I will never be the same," she whispered one last time, and for the first time she felt the weight of those words. There was no victory in the truth, only the harsh reality of what had been lost. "I survived," she repeated, the words now carrying a different meaning. She had survived, yes, but she had also been broken. And as much as she longed for peace, she knew it would never come. Not for her. Truth had cost everything, and now there was nothing left but knowing.